الله الله يا ربي يا الله الله يا ربي يا الله.
Assalamu alaikum and Ramadan Mubarak. Hello and welcome to the Health Show and the last episode in a Ramadan special series, here only on the Islam channel. During the month of Ramadan, Muslims fast every day from dawn to sunset. It's a time of spiritual discipline, of deep contemplation of one's relationship with Allah. This includes extra prayer, increased charity and generosity, and an intense study of the Holy Quran. And for those fasting this month, we've been guiding you on how to remain healthy throughout the month. The topics we've been focusing on have included eating healthily and weight loss, fasting in Ramadan, and women's health. In our final show, we're talking about mental health, and are delighted to welcome Aisha Aslam, counsellor and director of Sakoon, a Muslim counselling service that looks after the Muslim community, incorporating mainstream therapy ideas. With Aisha, we're going to explore the benefits of fasting and how it can help our well-being. We'll also discover how fasting can have a negative impact on our mental health and how, as a community, we can learn how to support others who may be suffering from anxiety or depression. Aisha, thanks so much indeed for coming along today.
Thank you for having me.
It's a very, very special time, and I'd like to start off by asking you about how you celebrate Ramadan and what happens to you during this month.
Sure. So for myself, what I usually like to do is just to prepare myself beforehand and just get myself into that sort of mindset in regards to preparing for Ramadan when it comes to fasting. So some of the things I might do would be trying to cut out my caffeine and tea so I don't have them cravings when it comes to fasting. I would also just in terms of the sort of physical side of things when it comes to cooking, having all my food ready beforehand and getting things ready for my children. And then I will also think about certain du'as that I would like to make, so I'll write them down. I'll get myself, get the house cleaned beforehand if I need to, if I have to do that. And just to lighten my load, so there isn't so much that I need to do when it comes to Ramadan, and I can really spiritually just focus on my ibadah. And just the reminder that for Muslims, we're here for that prime purpose. Our purpose is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I see Ramadan as a training period, a period of helping us to get back into that zone, into that mindset as to what our purpose is. It is to worship Allah. And we have that environment, that routine where we can be spiritual. We can incorporate additional time to pray rather than doing other things that we usually do outside of Ramadan. And to really use that as a way of seeing if we can implement this outside of Ramadan as well. And being human, where we can't always maintain that sort of period, but it's a good way of just bringing it back into our life.
And that's the thing, isn't it, when you say bring it back into your life, because it's almost like a refocus, isn't it?
Yes.
Where you get to look at your faith, look at everything that you do.
Yeah.
And for people who maybe are more focused on their mental health, that can bring positives and negatives.
Yes.
But the whole concept of rethinking about yourself, for some people that's going to be a little bit uncomfortable.
It can be. It depends on one, in terms of what experiences that you've gone through. That can have an impact on how a person thinks about the situation, how a person feels about being themselves or being in a room on their own and being able to do certain things on an individual level. They may have had difficult experiences where they get anxious, or they may be suffering from depression. So these sort of illnesses that do exist and many people go through, it can have an impact on us when it comes to focusing, because that is some of the fears. This is the place where we get really worried and we feel really uncomfortable, and it doesn't bring us peace at all. So it can actually have an opposite effect for some people. And this is where, when it comes to counselling or seeking support and treatment, that's where you can really be able to find out what strategies would help you and to be able to overcome these difficulties and these struggles that people do go through on a day-to-day basis.
And because there's so much focus on family, on one's faith during Ramadan, there's of course very often a huge amount of support available within one's own community, whether it be at the mosque or whether it be, you know, family, friends. But there are times when actually, as you touched on then, you do need to go beyond that, where sometimes the only real help for that kind of person is going to be to go to a specialist.
Definitely, definitely. So there is this understanding that, yes, there is this community cohesion, there's this really nice spiritual feeling, everyone is kind of connected, and there's a really nice spiritual atmosphere, alhamdulillah. However, when you are going through mental health issues, not many people within the community understand what mental health actually is. And just in a nutshell, mental health is, it has an impact on how we think, how we feel, how we act. It affects our physical, our social, and our mental well-being. It affects the way we relate to others, how we make choices. So mental health can have an impact on our overall well-being. It's not a physical illness, it is a hidden illness. So on the perception, a person can perceive you as looking perfectly fine. What's wrong with them? There's no direct physical illness that can be perceived. However, internally, they will be struggling and they will be suffering in silence. And there's certain things that perhaps the community may do, like judge them or pressurize them, not necessarily understanding what they're going through, and that can have a negative impact on a person's well-being.
Your charity, Sukoon, and what a great job you do, looking particularly at the Muslim community and helping with issues that may be unique to the Muslim community or certainly are highlighted within that community. Give us an overview of who you are and what you do and the sort of help that you can give.
Sure. So I'm the founder of Sukoon Counselling Services. We offer counselling where we combine mainstream therapy with Islamic counselling. So we also incorporate a spiritual approach where we look at the Quran, we look at the Sunnah, but equally we also take into account culture and family dynamics. We work with individuals, we work with couples, and we work with families. We work all around the world. So alhamdulillah, we've got about 10 therapists on board. We actually have 3 tutors now, and we also offer accredited counselling courses. We work with various organisations. At present, we're actually collaborating with Eternal Gardens. They're one of the largest UK Muslim cemeteries, and we're working alongside them in regards to mental health. And we've also got some contracts with 2 of the largest Muslim matrimonial websites as well. So there's a lot of active work that we're doing, as well as providing therapy. We also provide training. We also work within communities, and we're also teaching and delivering CPDs.
And during your service and work, how does that change during Ramadan? Do you notice much difference for the people who come to you and talk to you?
There is still the struggle when it comes to mental health, and we do still get quite a lot of clients that do come to us, because at the end of the day, mental health does not stop. It will carry on, and it is really important people seek support. When it comes to Ramadan, however, there's sometimes this perception in our community that we have to be a certain way, or we have to be fasting, or we have to be strong in these sorts of situations, and it's shameful, or it's embarrassing to talk about certain topics. For example, I'm not fasting, and it may not be perceived as socially acceptable to be not fasting, and then there's this concept of how would that person judge me. So there can be these sorts of concepts that comes along with certain clients when it comes to anxiety or depression, for example. But what we do at Sukoon is we try to incorporate the spiritual perspective that actually, from an Islamic perspective, there are situations where fasting is not necessary for yourself. So there are some sayings, I can't remember the exact quote, but there's a quote that if fasting makes you feel even more sick and it's even more difficult for you and it worsens your recovery, that you are permitted to not fast.
And that, of course, includes mental health as well as physical health. Exactly.
And this is where a lot of people tend to focus so much on the physical health as opposed to the sort of mental health. And this is what I really wanted to highlight today, is that there are a lot of mental health illnesses out there where fasting can actually cause more harm than good. And just to give you an example, one would be eating disorders. So
something that's very common today.
Which is very common, and it happens in all communities. And just to give you a very brief overview of what eating disorders is that it's this severe disturbance in eating. And some sort of examples are anorexia, binge eating, bulimia nervosa. And the kind of overall concept is that they have this sort of obsessive worry in eating, they have this negative attitude in eating, they worry, they ruminate in weight loss. When it comes to social events, they tend to avoid events. So for example, when it comes to a wedding, for one, I look forward to eating and I look forward to not having to cook for one day. But for someone who goes through eating disorders, they will be constantly worrying about, oh my gosh, how am I going to eat? And how can I avoid eating? What will I do? Shall I just leave it? Let me try and get out of it. So there's this constant worry and anxiety that they're always facing. And a lot of people who go through eating disorders, they tend to suffer from low self-esteem, this need to pleasing others, and they have this sort of perfectionist sort of personality at times. And when it comes to the community, this is where people don't necessarily understand that when you say to them, you should be fasting, and it's a punishment if you don't fast, which does happen, and it happens quite often, it will inhibit them. It will actually cause more harm than good. And just to give you a quick case, I had one girl, she was 16, she collapsed at a train station, and it came to light that she was diagnosed with anorexia. She had treatment, came to Ramadan, and her GP told her to not fast because it's really important that they have regular routine and a regular positive association with food. She wasn't at that stage at that point in time. However, her family and her community were saying that it's a sin to not fast, you should be fasting. And because she has low self-esteem and she wanted to please people, she ended up fasting. And fasting, of course, encourages the eating disorder. And she ended up collapsing, and she went back into a relapse into the sort of eating disorder.
And mental health is one of those things we've seen generally in Britain, you know, that it's become something that's talked about a little bit more.
Yes.
You know, we've seen the engagement from the royal family, for example. So it's becoming more accepted and recognised. But within the Muslim community, how much more work is there to do there?
There is a lot more recognition. I completely agree with that. In London, I do see a lot more understanding that there's education. Professionals are more open to the idea of wanting to have counselling. When it comes to Ramadan, however, I do feel there isn't enough understanding as to how mental health can have an impact on one's well-being when they're fasting. And this is what I really wanted to discuss, like the eating disorders. When you're saying to somebody you should be fasting when they're suffering in that situation, that's causing them more harm than good. Situations where someone's been diagnosed with schizophrenia and they've been prescribed medication and they have to have it at a specific time, and they end up fasting, they can go into going back into a psychotic and manic episode. So this is where it's really important to understand that if a GP or a consultant, a psychiatrist, a therapist has actually said, look, this is where you can't fast, or you've got to take your medication and you've got to provide that necessary support and coping mechanisms, which is what counselling does, that will enable them to be able to fast, but in a very healthy and secure way.
And the real key here is support from family, friends,
Yes.
and the community generally, isn't it? Because much as they can maybe come to organisations such as yourself, you know, the GP and other professional services who will absolutely be on their side, it's getting that message across to the wider community, isn't it, to allow them to be looked after in the way that they need to be.
Definitely, definitely. And attitudes need to change. And I know when it comes to Ramadan, I've come across many times, are you fasting? That's the very first question that's asked. And there is this pressure, oh gosh, I need to say yes, or if I don't say yes, then there's, well, why? And then they're kind of questioning if it's to do with you're diabetic, or is it because you're pregnant, or is it one of them, the common reasons that people understand when you can't fast and is accepted. But if someone doesn't want to tell you about their mental health issue, because it can be a very personal topic, a person feels really pressured in that situation.
What tips do you have in terms of the types of food and the sort of method of fasting, in terms of how you break your fast, how you prepare yourself for the next fast and so on? Are there things that foods and the sort of habits that you can have during that time that can actually boost your mental health?
Definitely. So there is this saying, you are what you eat. So the food that we do eat has got an impact on our well-being. So there is research that shows that if you eat junk food, oily food, fizzy drinks, very sugary food, it will make us feel a lot more lethargic. We'll feel not motivated in wanting to do things, and it can also create very low mood and sad mood within us. So it makes us feel quite, you know, we don't really want to do things, and it creates cravings as well. But if you're eating more healthier foods, a lot more fruits and vegetables in your diet, and lean meat, for example, that will in itself create more positivity. You'll have more energy levels, and you'll feel a lot more positive in your sort of well-being. There's a lot of research that actually shows that within Ramadan, I don't want to go too much in the physical side of things, but it decreases cholesterol. And cholesterol is connected to this idea of heart attacks and strokes and heart diseases, that it reduces the risks in them situations. There's research to show that it reduces cortisol, which is a stress hormone. So there's less stress levels, and it increases in the brain, boosts the brain activities. So we get an increase in neurotrophic factors, which produces more brain cells, which makes us more alert, higher concentration levels, we can think, we're more focused. So you can see that just from a neuroscientific perspective, how much benefit fasting can have on a person's physiological level and how it connects to our well-being as well. So these things are really important, just to recognize the diet we have and seeing how it can help in so many different levels on ourselves.
What would you say to people who may be approaching Ramadan and they're almost the pressure that you talked about earlier on of fasting and so on, for people who maybe already suffer from anxiety and depression?
Sure.
What advice do you have for the individuals and equally for the parents, families and people around
Definitely.
them? What advice would you give?
And I'm glad you said that, because it's not just about the individual,
Yeah.
it's about the community as a whole and for the family system as well. First and foremost, what I would suggest is that the individual seeks medical advice so that they can get that confidence to know that from a medical perspective that they can be able to fast, and then it's their choice, or they can't fast in that situation, and then they have a choice as to what they want to do. If they can fast, that's great, alhamdulillah, but it would also be about looking at ways of coping, and that's where the source of treatment, the source of support and idea of counselling will be really helpful. So just to give some examples would be the healthy eating, having a nap during the day just to refresh yourself. If you're going through anxiety or depression, just to have a short siesta would be really helpful, just to make you feel a little bit more relaxed. The spiritual side of reading the Quran, doing the prayers will help you more spiritually, and it can increase that feeling of peace, that tranquility that we're all seeking. Also breaking away from certain bad habits. So just recognizing that in the month of Ramadan, it's a month of self-control and self-discipline. So we are controlling one's anger, one's irritability, one's frustrations. If we're going through depression or anxiety, we're managing the worried thoughts, the negative thoughts that come into our mind, the sort of negative feelings that are associated with that. And what we're also doing is we're increasing in good moral habits and behavior. So in the month of Ramadan, we tend to be more generous. We tend to give food to our neighbours. We tend to give food to family and friends. We tend to give more charity at that time. We increase in patience. And all of these qualities will help in our well-being. It will make us feel happy. It will make us feel spiritual. And then having that community around us where we're all doing one thing, we're all praying, we're all doing ibadah, we're worshipping. And we've got this kind of smile towards one another. We can connect. That in itself will help someone to feel more positive. And another suggestion would be positive attitude. So, like I mentioned, if someone is anxious, they're going to constantly be battling with anxious, worried thoughts. Someone who's depressed will be battling with these really negative, sad, depressed thoughts. And it's really about helping them, and this is where counselling comes in, where we can help them to create more positive, realistic thoughts that will help them, that will aid them to be able to break free from anxiety and from depression. Again, it would be through assessments as well that I can assess what else would be required to support them. But it's that sort of overall well-being. And when it comes to the family and the community, it's about reminding them about support. Okay, so support encourages a person, and the pressure discourages a person. It debilitates them. So this is the key I would recommend.
And it's almost like we would love this to be replicated throughout the year, but I suppose Ramadan, by its nature being just 1 month of the 12, that it's that whole opportunity to focus one's mind on doing better things. A question I've got quickly for you is, we talked a lot there about people around somebody who might be suffering with mental health concerns. Maybe this is something when families spend a little bit more time with one another during Ramadan. What are some of the signs that people should be looking out for to spot that there might be mental health concerns where actually they could either broach the subject or give them some form of guidance in terms of getting help or giving support of their own?
Sure. It could be various different things. So one I would mention is if you see a change in their behaviour. So say, for example, they were quite an active person, they were quite sociable, very bubbly, and now you're noticing that they're a bit more isolated or they keep themselves to themselves. Certain ways of how they think about situations, so do they tend to avoid certain situations or feel, oh gosh, I don't want to go there because something bad might happen. There may be certain changes in that behaviour that you might notice that wasn't there before, and now you're starting to see that change. So that could be a sign. They're sort of emotions. So are they a bit more irritable than normal? Are they a bit more angry, or are they passive? Do they tend to keep things in? They don't talk so much. Avoidance as well. So it's all these sort of things can take place. And I guess when you start talking to someone, you will notice if you've got that relationship, you can see that sort of change within them. And if you do see that, it's really important just to subtly say to a person, I've noticed a change in yourself. Is there anything that's going on? Or would you ever like to talk about it? I'm here. So just in a gentle manner, but not in a kind of very directly, what's wrong with you? It's more about just the way you speak, and remembering that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he was always talking to anybody with kindness and with love, and that's the way that will enable a person to feel encouraged, to feel motivated, to feel safe, that they can talk about some things that could be really intimate and very personal to them.
And hopefully as a result of this programme, people will be feeling more positive towards actually doing something about it. Would you just sum up for us, you know, how you feel about mental health during Ramadan and what we can all do to make sure that we and those that we care for around us suffer less?
So first and foremost, I think we always focus on the benefits of Ramadan, and that's great, and that is what will help us to get through Ramadan and to help us to have a positive experience, as opposed to the sort of thoughts that can come into people's mind about, oh gosh, Ramadan is coming, I'm not looking forward to it, what I'm going to suffer. So there's a complete different perspective. But what we don't do is we don't focus on when fasting can be harmful. And this is really what I wanted to highlight in today's talk, is that fasting can be harmful for some people. Like I've mentioned, certain mental health issues like eating disorders or paranoid schizophrenia, or even anxiety or depression, depending on how severe that depression and anxiety is. This is where our community need to be supportive as opposed to judgmental. And that attitude that we have towards the community, people who are suffering with these illnesses, it can cause them more harm than good. And
like everything else, it's all about having that extra bit of knowledge and awareness of everything. Yes. Thank you so much indeed for your time. No, really appreciate it. So there you have it, some important and really helpful advice on mental health. Now, we must stress that should you suffer from any medical problems, it's always highly recommended that you contact your doctor or GP, as the Health Show and the Ramadan Special gives you an alternative viewpoint to health concern being discussed. Well, that's all we have time for today, and indeed with this special Ramadan series. A big thank you to our guest Aisha Aslam and to all of our other experts for providing us with such great advice throughout Ramadan. And thank you at home for tuning into this special series of The Health Show. If you'd like to find out more about today's show or any of the topics that we've covered in the series, then please do email us, healthshow@islamchannel.tv. We certainly hope that the information over the last 4 weeks has helped you in some way to have better health. Have a wonderful Eid Mubarak, and whatever you do, eat well, eat healthily. Assalamu alaikum.
Allahu, Allahu, ya Rabbi, ya Allah. Allahu, ya Rabbi, ya Allah. Allahu, Allahu, ya Rabbi, ya Allah. Allahu, ya Rabbi, ya Allah.
La ilaha illallah, la إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله.